Well, thanks everyone for joining us this Thursday evening. My name is Brian Henry. I'm a committee member for the Atlanta chapter of AES, the Audio Engineering Society. Welcome to the first episode of our new series that we're hosting virtually. We're going to tour the Atlanta recording and production scene. We believe it's time to uncover some hidden gems in the music scene in Atlanta, and we think this Zoom format gives us a great opportunity to do that. We hope to continue this program long after the pandemic subsides. The National AES Society, the Audio Engineering Society, is the only professional society devoted exclusively to audio technology. Founded in the U.S. in 1948, it has grown to become an international organization. Unites audio engineers, creative artists, scientists, and students. And the website is aes.org, easy to look up if you want to get more information. The Atlanta chapter is led by engineer Jamie L. Dye. We have about 170 members, actually 176 as of this afternoon. There's plenty of room for more if you're interested in joining. We hold workshops, seminars, programs like this for professional students, enthusiasts of the audio trade, about six to eight programs a year. You don't have to be a professional audio engineer to join and get involved and learn. I can attest to that. I'm actually very new to the organization. My day job is a lawyer for Coca-Cola, but I've played the drums for 50 years and have a small home studio. And I just love to play and have had a great opportunity to hook up with some other audio engineers here in Atlanta. I can assure you the group is very, very welcoming and thrives on diverse viewpoints and interests. So I'd strongly encourage you to reach out and get involved. We'd love to have you. You can visit aesatl.org for more information, get the Facebook page, Twitter, Instagram, the whole 9 yards. Feel free to send us some ideas for future Zoom programs. We're putting another program together for next month, which should be really, really fun and interesting. So share those Atlanta music production nuggets with us to look into. So you are in for a special treat tonight. Have your headphones handy first to hear some real musical time machine treats and in HD as well. Matt has set up the listen to program, so you're going to hear 96K audio from some very old and just fascinating tapes. I heard some yesterday, and I can assure you that you will get some chills up your spine when you hear some of this music. So our special guest tonight is Atlanta archiving engineer Matt Leatherman. He is going to share some details of a very unique archiving effort that he and his company, Preserve South, have been asked to undertake for Austin City Limits, which is the longest running music series in television. Matt is a senior audio engineer and project manager at Preserve South, where he provides preservation services for historical audio collections. He's done work for Library of Congress, Smithsonian, PBS, National Center for Civil and Human Rights. He has a long history of working on major mastering projects with Rodney Mills Music Master House, and has celebrated numerous Billboard #1 hits and Rolling Stone top 10 reissues of the year. Obviously, we have a true expert here tonight. This is going to be a fascinating program. I don't want to talk any longer because we want to get this over to Matt. So I present to you preserving 45 years of Austin City Limits. Feel free to post questions in the chat, and we'll go from there. Matt, it's all yours.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. So Austin City Limits. This is a super exciting project. It's the first really the first presentation that we've done on the audio side for this project. It's such a cool, collection that I get to work on with these old multi-track recordings, and it's just it's been a really fun time working on it. And we've got about another couple of years of work to do on it, but tape keeps rolling, so we're having fun. So a little bit about our company. We're Preserve South, and we're here in Atlanta, and we specialize in digitizing large video, film, and audio collections, and mostly for like libraries and universities, museums, private collectors. It can be, videotape, reel-to-reel film or audio, DAT tapes, things like that. And I want to kind of show you a little bit of our studio. We've got a kind of a whole section of video that we do for like 3/4 U-Matics and SD cam, beta SPs and digibetas, and just really any type of video format that you could possibly think of. These are our 1-inch machines that we've been running our PBS job on. And it's just requires a lot of machines and a lot of hardware to make it all happen. Our sister company is Back Porch Broadcast, and they are essentially a group of former Sony bench techs who started Back Porch and are helping us out with the Preserve South side, because with all this gear, they've got someone needs to fix it all. So they're there for us to kind of lean against when we're working with all of our gear. These are our robots that we use for some of our video projects, where we can stick a whole bunch of videotapes in one robot and let this thing run for, essentially 24 hours to a week, however long it takes. So it's pretty cool stuff. We also have a film suite where we have a brand new, actually 6.5K scanner. And we can scan film from 35 millimeter, 28 millimeter, all the way down to 8 millimeter. And what's cool about this laser graphics scanner is that it's a sprocketless design. So a lot of times you get film that's warped, or it's got broken sprockets, or it has edits, things like that. This scanner can essentially accept all formats. And then after it's scanned, we actually John is our colorist, and he does just a phenomenal job restoring some of these old film collections. And we get to see a lot of really, really cool films come through here from different museums. Particularly, if you're watching old films at 6.5K, it's just really incredible the quality that we can get out of it. These are our quad rooms. If some of you might remember these machines, these are old 2-inch quad video machines, and they're pretty phenomenal, actually. I mean, they're helical scan machines, which means it's the head is kind of at an angle, and it scans kind of the same way VHS does. And what's unique about these machines is that the heads rotate at about 14,000 RPM. And so they're screaming fast. And so we have to pump compressed air to these machines which kind of creates a bed of air between the head and the actual tape, because otherwise the tape would just effectively melt. But we've got all types of quad machines. We've been kind of repairing them, and we're getting a new high band quad machine, which is really exciting. These quad machines were essentially what video was recorded on between like the late 50s to about the mid 70s. And so with all this digitization, it requires a lot of equipment, and we just have racks and racks and racks of video stuff and audio stuff, and essentially every format that you can think of. And it's sometimes daunting. I wonder how we're able to keep all this stuff running, but those guys definitely do. This is the shop back where the Back Porch guys live. And many times I've wheeled in broken tape machines, and with their experience with Sony, they can essentially fix anything that we hand to them. So they're a staple for our company. So with all the collections that we work on, it requires an immense amount of storage. And so we've got this very large cold storage, essentially, where when we bring things in, it usually comes in on pallets, pallets of videotape or audio tape. And so we have to store it all in what is considered a cool, dry place, right? So It's about 60 degrees Fahrenheit, 45 degrees relative humidity, 40% relative humidity. So it's pretty precise, and we keep it monitored. What you're looking at here is the Court TV project that we're working on. We've been doing stuff for Court TV for quite a while now, and they are digitizing all of their old court tapes, which is kind of cool. And I believe this is the O.J. Simpson trial right here. So this is the PBS collection that we're working on. This is an amazing collection. We work with a lot of public broadcasting companies, and what you're looking at here is actually original masters from Sesame Street and Nova and PBS NewsHour, and just essentially anything that was ever on PBS. We're digitizing the collection, so it's pretty cool. And then with the audio stuff, we can do quite a few formats. We can't do them all, but we can do a lot. So I try to I wish I can buy more machines, but I have to kind of temper what I buy, because like any other audio person out there, I mean, it's really tempting to go out and buy machines all the time. So these are our Studer machines that we use for a lot of the 1/2-inch and 2-inch projects, which the 2-inch Studers is what I'm using for this project, which I'll show you guys later. We also have the digital machines. This is a Sony Dash 1/2-inch 48 track. So even after the open reel analog, there were several formats that kind of did the open reel digital format. It was short-lived, probably only lasted about maybe, I don't know, five or 7 years in its heyday, but we're able to do those. Most of the collections that we do is actually on 1/4-inch, which these are essentially amazing collections. We get collections from these different universities and libraries that just have hundreds of thousands of 1/4-inch. And so we're able to do quite a few 1/4-inch at a time. This was a cool asset that I digitized earlier this year. What was unique about this is that it wasn't playing right on my 1/2-track tape machine. So I've got this cool device where it's got this magnetic fluid inside of it, and you can place it down on top of the recorded tape, and you can actually see what's recorded on the physical tape. So in this case, it actually looks like it's a 2-track, but in fact, it was a 1/4 track. So that's, 1/4 track is a 4-track recording. And in this case, it had audio recorded on track 1 and channel 3. So 1 was like the side 1, and then channel 3 is like when you flip it over, it's now side 1 again, and there's like essentially a side 2 to the recording. So
Matt, real quick on that picture,
Mm-hmm.
that's showing those 2 tracks there. That's the physical track on the tape.
That's right. You're seeing the magnetization on the actual tape. There's a magnetic kind of fluid that's inside of that little device that I have. And they're really fun. I mean, it's really useful, because a lot of times I'll get these tapes that they're completely unlabeled, or you have a 1/2-inch tape. It could be an 8-track, it could be a 16-track, it could be a 2-track. So without even having to put anything on a tape machine, I use this thing a lot to kind of determine what is actually on it. That's particularly useful. So if you have like back-coded media, for instance, that needs to be baked, you can find out before you even bake it what's actually on it. So it's a pretty important device that I have. So outside of that, we also do the D88s. These are the PCM 800, which is the Sony version. Everybody's familiar with the D88s or D98s. DTRS was a pretty popular format, kind of post-analog, and actually a lot of the ACL stuff in the latter years, I think starting with season 29, they started using the DTRS tapes, and sometimes it was in addition to the 24-track analog, and sometimes they were just backups of the 2-inch analog tape. So we've got a lot of those. And also we do some Nagra. We've got center track time code Nagras, and also a pilot tone Nagra, which is a center track. It's a control track, which is essentially a tone that's on there. Nagras are very accurate in their playback. So we've got, we definitely rely on those. And grooved media, I just do thousands of records. That could be transcription discs, lacquers. You see that Edison diamond disc down there, that's actually a vertically cut disc. It's not a lateral cut disc. So instead of the side to side motion, it's kind of the hills and dales of actually cut into the record. And so with all the grooved records that we do, we have to have a collection of different cartridges and styli and, conical stylus and truncated stylus and elliptical and just all types of different stylus to essentially handle all of the transcription discs that we do. It's a pretty amazing collection sometimes. And then this is our mag machine, which is also kind of called a sound follower. These mag machines, in fact, I think, let me see if I can play this. This is actually audio recorded on film. This is a 16 millimeter film, which is called a full coat. And so the whole, 600 millimeters of, or 600 mils of film is actually coated with a magnetic stripe, just like audio tape is. And so this is what they would use to sync up audio with the film. They typically did this in real time back in the day because, it allowed them to do, if they had movies with different languages or, different edits, they would actually have these mag followers follow along. So enough about us. I want to talk about Austin City Limits. I'm just so excited about this collection. This is Studio 6A in KLRLU Austin, which is actually on the University of Texas campus. What you see here are a whole bunch of pallets of audio tape. And this is essentially everything that was recorded on tape through season 31, if I'm not mistaken, for Austin City Limits. And it was all recorded right here in this room in Studio 6A. So it's a lot of tape. And I really think this is the coolest picture I've ever seen. And this is David Huff. So David, he was the original audio engineer for ACL, and he's still there recording every show. He's been there since the pilot in 1974, and he's just such an interesting guy. And he's obviously, he's been around the music industry for so long, and it's pretty cool to know that he's had his hands in essentially every recording. There's a few that he missed through the years, but for the most part, everything that you hear in Austin City Limits is partially due to David Huff here. So along with David, there's Sharon Cullen, who's the audio supervisor, and Amanda Moore, who's the technical project director, and she's my fearless leader through the archiving process.
Matt, on those, back up your picture there. So what does each one of those boxes represent?
Well, with all the pallets, there are double layered pallets in this picture. And so each box is a single reel. So it's pallets and pallets and pallets of reels is essentially what it is.
And that's what you get. And
that's what they ship to us. That's right.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So I think a couple of years ago, 2 years ago, I was down in Austin for the Society of American Archivists conference. And David and Amanda and Sharon were kind enough to kind of give me a backstage tour of the original 6A studios. So this is the actual studio that every recording, well, all the recordings done at 6A were done in. you can see the Studer A80 in the background, which is the 16-track machine that they used for most of the years through the recordings, and they upgraded later on to a Studer A820 24-track. Of course, they added the Dolby SRs and other things. But right next to that machine, you'll see the 4-track ATR 104, the Ampex, which is what they mixed down all the stereo masters on. So they would take the 16-track, they would do a mix and bounce it down essentially to the 4-track. And they use the 4-track because the way they had it arranged is they had channel 1 and 2 were left and right. Channel 3 was the guard band, and channel 4 was a time code. And they had to have that guard band in there because sometimes you get crosstalk between the time code tracks. So usually the track that's right next to the time code track is kind of a dead track, because otherwise, if you use that track for audio, you would hear that in your final mix. So that's if I'm not mistaken, that's a Euphonics System 5 console that's in there. They actually had the Neve 36 channel, and even before that, for their I think the first 12 years, they had a 1073 16 channel mixing console in there. So this room has definitely seen its collection of audio gear, and it's pretty cool what it's been able to produce. So in 2011, ACL actually left Studio 6A, and they built the Moody Theater in downtown Austin, where they increased their audience capacity from around 300 people in Studio 6A to just over 2,700 people. So the new Moody Theater is just a phenomenal place. If you guys ever get a chance to go, even if it's not for a taping for Austin City Limits, which would be really cool, they have hundreds of live shows there every year. They didn't this last year, but they will hopefully coming up very soon. So a little history of Austin City Limits. The pilot was aired in 1974 with Willie Nelson, and kind of continued on from there. From season 1 and season 2, unfortunately, nothing was preserved. Those tapes were either reused from KLRU, or sometimes actually a lot of those tapes were actually used, erased and then reused for season 3. There was actually a children's, that was actually the first bilingual children's program on KLRU, which was Caras Calendas, I believe. And so a lot of those original tapes were reused for that broadcast. And what's fun about season 3 that I was working on is that although they were erased, there were a lot of programs where after the season 3 show stopped, the tape kept going, and you can kind of hear recordings from season 2 and possibly even season 1. So there's some kind of cool hidden stuff in those season 3 tapes that we're preserving. So what we're doing is season 3 through about season 31, which is 2006. And that includes 542 live performances, which consists of essentially 1,400 2-inch tapes. That's 16 and 24 track. And there's about almost 200 half-inch, quarter-track show masters. And all of this was recorded at 15 IPS. There were backups and some safety copies that were done at 7.5. But for the most part, the 15 IPS is where most of the tapes ended up. Later shows, they did Dolby SR. Most of the show masters had Dolby A encoded because you have a generation loss between your mix and your stereo master, essentially. And along with that, you had hundreds of D88 tapes that they did later on, and DAT backups. And it's almost 2,000 miles of analog tape. And we joke, that's enough tape to go from here in Atlanta to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland, and then all the way back with some room to spare. So it's a lot of tape that we're doing, miles and miles. If you guys ever want to see the anthology of Austin City Limits, they have a great anthology on their website, which shows every performance that's ever happened by date. And I use that all the time to kind of keep track of, okay, who's played what and how many times have they been on the show. It's actually pretty helpful to have. And through our process, we've actually kind of updated a few items on that anthology, things that were kind of mistaken, but now are corrected. So, with the, so this is the technology that happened through Austin City Limits. The first few seasons were actually recorded live mono to the quad videotape, those old machines I showed you earlier. And then they were technically backed up to the 16 track. So, but their main audio was actually done to the quad, which that was a mono broadcast. Obviously most broadcasts back then were in mono. Stereo was just beginning to be introduced in 1980, and that's when they started to use the 4-track masters. And what's unique about those is that they actually synced them in real time to the stereo broadcast. So they actually had tape machines running as the show was being broadcast. So that's a scary thing to think about, that to have, rely on everything to be syncing up and for a live broadcast. But that's how it was done. Season 9, they moved from quad and went to the 1-inch video. And from there, you can actually lay it back to stereo onto the 1-inch tape machines. So that happened around 1984. And then later on, you get into this the 24-track with the Dolby SR, and kind of the technology kind of took off after that with the digital stuff. And then on season 29, they actually stopped using tape, and they switched over to the Pyramix 56 track system. And if you're wondering about these guitars, this is actually a wall that's at the new Moody Theater. And it's a really fun picture because it shows who's got the most episodes. And if you can't read it, it's Willie Nelson's got 15, Lyle Lovett's got 13, and Asleep at the Wheel at 11. So those guys have been on the show a lot. It's pretty awesome. So all of those pallets we saw earlier are now being stored in our cold storage. I've got this high density shelving that's specific to Austin City Limits. And it's just a lot of stuff. We've shelved it all from the pallets, which it makes it kind of easier to work on. These originally sat in a salt mine in Kansas, which is where they store a lot of the old audio and videotape. Salt mines have, if you can imagine an underground salt mine, they have perfect relative humidity and temperatures. And so we're trying to mimic that environment here in our cold storage. And so it's thousands of tapes. And I get so excited walking through these aisles all the time, because I always see things that I just haven't seen before, and different artists that have played. And it's just it's a pretty cool thing. These tapes here are actually among the first that were recorded for ACL. This was season 3, if I'm not mistaken. So these were the first ones that were actually preserved through the process. You'll notice they are actually Ampex 456 tapes, at least the one on top. I think that's John Prine in that top box, which actually we'll actually hear that reel later on tonight if you guys stick around. So there's a lot of fun stuff in there. Yeah, and it just kind of keeps going. Ray Charles, Neil Young, Loretta Lynn. I mean, there's so many shows that are just, everyone is more amazing than the last, and it's a lot of fun to kind of walk through this collection. So the types of tapes that were used, for the most part, everything is mostly Ampex 456. But the early years, they used the Scotch 225 and 250. There's quite a few of those. There's several hundred of those, if I'm not mistaken. And you'll notice the size of the reels. There's the 10.5-inch reels, and then the larger 14-inch reels. And back in the day when they were taping live, they would actually have to stop between sets. And even if the artist was in the middle of a show and they run out of tape, I mean, they run out of tape. And so they have to, I can imagine David back in there kind of panicking and trying to put a new tape on and get it synced up real quick in real time. So it's, of course, when they moved to the 14-inch reels, that was what's a 1-hour tape. So they can essentially do a 1-hour show on one tape. There are still a couple shows where even with the larger reels, they went over, one or two tapes. But for the most part, with the smaller reels, there are some shows that are 2 tapes. There are some shows that are 7 or 8 tapes. And it just kind of depends on who the artist was and how much freedom they gave them. But, and then of course the AGFA, the PM 468, this was a short-lived tape in the collection. I think there's only a handful. That the AGFA is the one in the dark box there. It's the Ralph Stanley one. And that one was in such bad condition. This was actually an AGFA tape here, where even back then, you can see the back coating started coming off of these tapes. And this is one that I hadn't even touched yet. So that means when they mixed this and they had taken off that tape there, which is the hold down tape, it had already ripped off that backing. And so I'm assuming that plays a role in why that had such a short-lived moment in their recording process. So when we're bringing in a collection, the first thing that we do is we accession the assets, right? So we see like what condition they're in, and we notate essentially everything about that tape. In this case, we've got a copy stand. So a lot of the jobs that we do, we actually photograph the object first, and we've got the gray cards and the Kodak color cards to make sure that we're capturing everything at the right colors, and then those will exist with the digital masters that we end up with. For the ACL project, this is actually not in the scope of the Austin City Limits projects that we're doing, but I just kind of threw it up there just to kind of give you guys an idea of what that looks like. So when we're bringing out a reel, I'm notating everything about that reel. So that, if it's a polyester or if it's acetate, is it stored heads out or tails out? Does it have a stepped pack or sprocketed hub? Like all those things make a big difference, how it was stored. And it kind of tells a story about later on when you have the digital file and you're just listening to it or looking at the metadata. If you hear something wrong with the digital file, you can always go back to the metadata and say, oh yeah, well this had spoking or rippling, and that's why it was kind of messed up in this area of the tape. So without those notes, you would never know what the original condition is. And I highlighted the binder hydrolysis here because that's the most common that people are used to, which is also known as sticky shed syndrome. Which this is essentially what sticky shed syndrome is. I'm sure most people who use tape are familiar with what can go really wrong with sticky shed. In the 70s, most tape manufacturers, they switched from the acetate binders or the PVC binders to the polyester binders, really for performance reasons. But the polyester, unfortunately, is susceptible to hydrolysis, which, it's a chemical reaction with the air and water, essentially. And it just, over time, it breaks down. And so any asset that's determined to have binder hydrolysis or sticky shed, they have to be baked in low temperature ovens. And if you don't do this essentially what you're looking at is kind of what can happen to those tapes. Even the ones that have been baked, sometimes this is what happens. In fact, I think this was a reel here. This was not an ACL reel, but this was a 1/4-inch reel that I had worked on, where it was such poor condition. And we had permission to run it anyway, because otherwise it would have never been saved. So sometimes that's what happens. And then a lot of times when you bake a tape, you can you've got about 2 days to about 2 weeks, maybe sometimes 3 weeks. It really depends on the age of the tape. I've baked tapes before where they last for a couple days. And some that will last a month. And then what happens is they'll actually revert back to their original state, and they'll be sticky again. So you have to rebake them. And a lot of times when you rebake things over and over again, it deteriorates the quality of those tapes. And so you have to be very careful about what you're baking and what the history of that tape was previously. So this is essentially our tape baking procedure. We've for the most part, I'm only baking the back-coated polyester. There is a non-back-coated polyester, and sometimes we have to bake those, but not very often. It's mostly just the back-coated polyester, which is, like your Ampex 456, Scotch 250 is even the 499s. All that has to be baked because of the back coating. And so what my process is I pull it out of cold storage and let it sit and kind of acclimate to the actual room temperature, because we want to gradually bring these tapes to different temperatures. And then we bake it for about 2 weeks in some cases at 54 degrees Celsius, which is 129.2 Fahrenheit. And we keep it at that temp. We try not to deviate from those temperatures. Sometimes with tapes that are older and they need a little bit hotter ovens. Sometimes with the 1/4-inch tapes, we don't need to go that hot. There's a lot of archives that actually have standards where we can't bake anything over 53 degrees Celsius. So there's lots of rules that are behind it. But 54 is about where we bake most of our tapes. And then once I'm done baking them, they will sit in my studio where I actually digitize things and for at least 12 hours, because again, you want to make sure that it's all the right gradual temperatures, kind of ramping up. And yeah, so another thing with the considerations is usually when you bake tape, not all the time, but tapes that have splices in them, particularly with the 1/4-inch tapes, those splices will break. And so then after the baking process, you have to go through and replace all of the original splicing tape. And that can be that could be a lot of work, because, I've done tapes where there's, 50 to 100 splices in one small 1/4-inch reel. And it takes hours to do. So before I move to the next slide, these are actually the ovens that I use. For ACL, I use about 14 ovens. And so what that lets me do is every day I can pull out tapes from an oven, and it allows me to kind of rotate those tapes. So I'm always feeding tapes and I'm always pulling tapes out. It's not like I'm pulling tapes like 50 or 100 tapes out all at once, because then I can work on 90 of them, but or 10 of them, but the other 90 are just going to sit there and potentially go back to their original state. So it's all very kind of choreographed, if you will.
Hey, Matt, there's a question on the chat there. Are those tape specific ovens, brand, model?
So these are actually these are modified dehydrators is what we use. And so we've taken these dehydrators. These are Omcan, if I'm not mistaken. I think they're called Omcan dehydrators, and they don't have the best. They're okay. They have pretty accurate temperature control. They've got fans inside, so it's like a convection kind of thing. But what we've done is, and of course you can't see it because the photo that I took here, but we have modified every one of these with a temperature controller. And so it kind of bypasses the internal components of the actual oven itself, and we program our own temperature controls, and it actually becomes, for what we do, is more precise, which is what we need. So it's to have a deviation. If you left it unmodified, and this is true with most ovens, or a lot of people use those kind of those plastic food dehydrators and everything, and those work fine. But when you're working with these older tapes, particularly, you really have to have some steady temperatures. And so now with the modifications, these are accurate within 0.2 of a degree. I mean, it's extremely accurate. And so we can program ramp times in there to ramp up and ramp down, and all that is super important for the baking. And if you're looking for ovens to bake tapes, I mean, you can just get an off-the-shelf food dehydrator, but you really need to stick some other thermometers in there and really kind of keep an eye on what your temperatures are, because you can otherwise just completely ruin a tape. So when these pictures are awesome. When David gave me a tour of 6A Studio, I saw this box sitting in the corner, down in the corner of the studio, and he very excitedly showed me that this was their oven back in the late 70s, or well, in the 80s, essentially, when they had to bake tapes. David created this box where it's a hair dryer duct taped to a cardboard box. And I think this is fantastic, because with all the technology and stuff that we have now, and how intricate and precise we have to be with our oven temperatures and things like that, David was able to do it with this hair dryer in a box. And these are like my favorite pictures of all time. If you notice, there's a little wooden stick that sits underneath the box there, which is for air to come through, right? So you got the air going in through the hair dryer, and it's coming out the bottom. And he's got a little menu on here of exactly how to do it and how to make your adjustments. And I just think that's fun. I mean, there were some big records that were done in this box that were baked in here from the Austin City Limits collection, like Waylon Jennings and Willie Nelson and Johnny Cash. I mean, all those were baked using this box, and I find that just like it's awesome. So these tapes that I'm working with are huge. This is the 14-inch tape, and I mean they're pretty big tapes compared to the the 10.5-inch tapes that everybody's kind of used to. This is the hour-long tape that these reels, even without the box, it's well over 20 pounds per reel. So it's a big mass of tape. And the one thing about this picture is that the bottom, and I should have got a better picture of this, but the bottom flange of these reels, we're actually looking at the bottom of the tape here, and the bottom flange has no windows in it. It's just full 14 inches of metal. And so what I do is when I bake the tape is I pull those flanges off and I bake them upside down. That way it allows air to get to the entire tape. And some tapes you can do this with, other tapes you can't. But these tapes are in good condition, so it's safe to do this. Even with the top side of these reels, the windows are so small on the top side. I mean, they kind of look big here, but they're only like 1.5 inches. They're just enough to stick your finger in to do a hold when you're holding it down to wind it, and that's about it. So yeah, I stick these big massive reels without their tops into the oven, and of course, we have hold down tape, so we don't want anything flapping around inside the oven. Otherwise, it could cause a real issue. But this allows the air to flow all the way through the ovens and through the tapes and everything. It really works well. So particularly when you're working with baking back-coated tape, this is something I want to show you. This is not part of the ACL collection. This is a 1/4-inch tape that I had done last year, where it was half acetate and half back-coated polyester. In fact, excuse me, I think there was actually some non-back-coated polyester in this as well. So it was a whole like mishmash of tape. And this one in particular actually had still had the paper leader tape, the old acidic paper leader tape, which we had to replace. But if you're ever curious about baking acetate, if you, it's one thing to bake polyester, but if you bake acetate, it will completely melt and ruin the tape. I mean, you'll have a big melted mess in your oven. So you really have to know before you bake the tape what you're working with. To find out like what's polyester and what's acetate, I mean, really the simple way is just hold it up to a light. If you're getting ready to bake a tape and you're not really sure what it is, hold it up to a light. You'll see the light actually shines through the acetate tape, and it doesn't shine through the polyester. I use this light table, which is super handy for some of the tapes that are a little bit harder to determine like what exactly they are. It could be a mix of 3 or 4 different types of tape. And this allows me to make a safe judgment on whether I can stick it in the oven or not. And so those tapes that do have, you know, like a back-coated polyester on the outside, I mean, technically you're not supposed to, you're supposed to bake them in their original spooled condition or position. So winding these, I mean, in order to preserve this, you have to wind it off to get to that acetate. Because if you bake this reel, it would just melt, or at least part of it would melt. So I've got this little system that I've kind of designed where I can very slowly and very carefully put warm air on the polyester and protect the acetate. So this happens at very slow speeds. I mean, it could probably take 2 days, I think it took for this reel, for it to actually wind very slowly while feeding it this hot air. And it actually works really well. So going back to this copy stand picture that I had, you'll notice that white band that sits around the actual reel of the tape. That's a guard band that Ampex had used essentially for forever. They've always had these guard bands. The problem is those they were Velcro, and it's Velcro. You know, you stick the band on and it Velcros together, and it's supposed to protect the edges of the tape. And so they did serve a purpose. You know, there's arguments about if these should be used or not. I don't think that they should be used because outside of the problems I'm getting ready to show you, they also kind of hold in moisture, and you want your tapes to be able to breathe regularly, because otherwise, if you have these bands on there, it really kind of closes those air gaps from flange to flange, and so the tape essentially can build up moisture inside of the reel. So you'll notice the Velcro has ripped off here. This is what happens with these old bands. This is almost unavoidable nowadays. There's some tapes where the Velcro still works great, and it's just, I don't know why, but most of the tapes that we do, particularly with the older tapes, the Velcro just rips right off. You can't undo the band without creating an entire mess. And in some cases, this is how they exist inside the box. So what happens is you open a box up of tape, and there's this glue that's everywhere. It's all over the tape. It's all over the reels. And so I have to go through and clean all of these before anything gets baked. Because if you were to bake this, they would essentially bake in that glue to the reel, and it would just cause a real bad mess. I mean, kind of the same problem happened with the old quad tapes, where kind of like the 2-inch audio tapes, quads had these like padding, and I should have included a picture of this, but they had this like internal padding that kind of protected the tape, and all of that glue is also seeping out. And so we use, at least for the quad tapes, we use eucalyptus oil, which works really well to clean off old glue deposits from flanges. But with this, I mean, I use compressed air. I've got like horsehair brushes that I use to clean all this off, but all of it has to come off before we bake. You'll see this is a flange. When those things fail in the box, it's kind of hard to see the guard band in this picture, but what happens is the people didn't use hold down tape all the time, and instead they would just wrap the tape in the guard band without using hold down tape. And so once the guard band fails, the media starts completely unraveling in the box, and so now you have a real big issue with all types of creases and just cause all types of problems. So now, because I'm removing all of these, I have thousands of these guard bands. I don't know what I'm going to do with them. I'll probably donate them to some like maker group or something. That they're pretty good material outside of the Velcro part. We Amanda, the archivist, and I talked about these bands, and we thought about, well, we can reattach the Velcro and reuse the bands, but you start getting into well, what kind of glue should you use for the Velcro? It's up to a certain standard, and it's got to be able to last another 50, 100 years in cold storage. And there's just so many variables to it that we just decided not to use these bands. So I have boxes and boxes and boxes of bands. So this is, well, the next step after baking is winding. I typically don't use the Studers or any tape machine for that matter for winding tape. For the most part, when people are rewinding tape, it's kind of at their pretty fast speeds, and that can cause some real bad issues, particularly with the older tapes. So I use a modified JH110, an old MCI machine that I have, and I use that specifically for slow winding tape. It goes, 0.09375 IPS. So it takes about I can rewind about 2 to 3 reels a day on that machine, and I do that because there's a lot that can go wrong when you're winding tape off. And then while I'm winding it, I'm actually cleaning it. I'm cleaning both sides of the tape. So this was a really disgusting tape that I had done several years ago. So it's pretty important, if you were just to stick this without, if you wind it and you just stuck it on the tape machine and hit play, all of this would end up on your heads. And so you obviously don't want that. So we want to get all that stuff off before we actually play the tape. Another reason why I do slow winding at the speeds I do is because in those cases where the reels have kind of shifted or there's like cinching in the pack, if you're going at a high speed, what happens is the machine will pull with like kind of a high tension, and it could either stretch or break the tape. And so particularly with after you bake, if you've got a lot of leader tape with old glue that's been edited together, all of that's going to break if you're going at high speeds. So that's kind of why I use the slow speeds there. And then this is a example of a couple things. So because you never really know what's inside these as you get further and further into the tape as you're winding it, a lot of mystery happens in there. And you'll see in this picture, it kind of the back coating has kind of started deteriorating, and I'll show you why. But this is the kind of stuff where kind of shows why you don't want to just fast wind a tape off, because you don't know if the stuff exists or not. This is something that you can't see from the outside. So you have to go at these very slow speeds. If you look at the top, and I'll see if my pointer can go up there, this right here is a popped strand, what they call a popped strand. So that's one little thing of tape that's sticking out. And so what's funny about this is that if you hand somebody a reel that has a pop strand on it, 9 times out of 10, they're gonna just by default, they're gonna take their finger and touch it because they like, oh, it's a pop strand. And, they touch it. And so what happens is that the oxide comes off right here, and that's kind of a good example of working with a reel. You have to kind of train yourself to not go through and touch these things, because it will pull off the magnetic recording on here. So this could be your time code track, that could be your kick drum track, and it's essentially gone forever if you do that. So when you get to the cores of these tapes, and this is true for all of the ACL stuff and most every 2-inch tape that I do, it doesn't matter where it comes from. Inside the core of these tapes, they had these rubber kind of gaskets that went around the hub of the reel. And what's starting to happen is these rubber hubs are starting to exude this kind of corrosive, oily stuff. And that's just, a part of what rubber does. You've seen those like pinch rollers on tape machines where over the years, they've kind of melted all over the machine. They just break down like most rubber does. But what happens with these is that they actually, they react with the flanges that are on the tapes. So you can see in this photo, this is one of the ACL tapes where the windows, you can see where like the oxygen has been able, just from the air, has been able to kind of get inside, and it's reacted with that kind of rubber exudate, oily stuff, and it really is a bad deal, because it essentially the metal starts corroding, which then it affects the tape on the fringes. You'll see, like in this picture, this is an old Ampex tape where it's back in the day. Ampex didn't have the standards that they obviously did, in the latter 2000s, where they were making better flanges. Where this was an old Ampex flange, and the machining was real raw and rough on it. And so that raw machining actually reacted to the corrosion that was happening on the inside, and it's actually corroded the fringe on this tape. You can kind of see the line on there. And this is happening with all tapes at some varying degree, which is why it's a real big problem.
Hey, Matt,
Yeah.
Just a quick time check. It's almost 8, so I just want to make sure you knew where you're at.
Okay, I'm gonna try to plow through things. All right, so these are fingerprints on the flange, and again, same thing. These are manufacturers' fingerprints. Whoever assembled this reel has put their fingerprints on it, and over the course of 50, for 30 something years, it's actually reacted with the same corrosion, and you can see where exactly all of those fingerprints are in the reel. This is an Austin City Limits reel that is. I ended up being able to save all of it. There is some stuff. There's that ring in the middle there where it's really bad and just kind of ate into the fringes there. And this is, again, what happens with those fringes when it kind of seeps into the tape. And you can see the image on the bottom left there, where the pinning, it's called pinning, has started to happen, where the actual recording media, has pulled off. And so that could be your time code tape, which is detrimental to syncing the tape up. And then, of course, when you get to the core of the tape, it's just a mess. It's just all types of stickiness, and it's almost impossible to pull the tape off without completely ruining it. So again, another reason why slow winding is a big deal. If you're winding things at 100 miles an hour, it'll rip the last 2 feet of the tape off. This is one that I saved with a slow wind. It's a discolored. You can see the discoloring on it. That's what actually touched the rubber hub, and so of course I pull the rubber off now. So the tape will, when it's spooled back on, it goes either directly on the metal or directly on the original. Those are old, either plastic or, oh gosh, what were those things made of? This kind of the old the reels that were kind of a plasticky reel. And so now I've got hundreds of these things too. There's so many of them. I've got boxes of these rubber hubs, and these are what will end up killing a lot of 2-inch masters. And so that's why it's really important to try to preserve what you can as soon as you can, because these will be the downfall of 2-inch tape. I have a feeling. So other things real quick, there's manufacturer's defects. Not often, but every once in a while you see them. People writing in grease pencils on tape. You got to clean all that stuff off because it can affect it. There's mold and mildew. You see the bottom middle picture. You see that there's kind of like striping on the tape. That was from a previous tension issue. Someone played the tape and then the tension settings were way too high, so it's ruined the tape there. So all of this stuff is notated in the metadata because you got to know what was wrong with the tape when you played it, and it kind of paints that picture of what was actually wrong. So now I'm going to get into the digitization process. How am I doing it? We are recording everything in at 24-bit 96K. It's about 22 terabytes of data altogether, which is, in comparison, it's the video portion of this project that we had done was about 300 terabytes. So it's a pretty big difference. I'm using Pyramix for the ingest for all the digitizations, and that's for the 2-inch, the 4-track, and all the DATs and D88s that we're doing. Everything is synced to timecode, so it's really important to have everything synced up properly. And then we're embedding the metadata. One thing that's important to me is making sure that everything is direct wiring, right? So if you got a tape machine, it's wired directly into the converter. If it goes through a Dolby, then it would go to a Dolby and then to the converter. But most Dolby units have a bypass function, which I don't use because you're still introducing some connectors and extra components and stuff. So we want to have the cleanest signal as possible. This is the one of the studios that I use for the digitization for Austin City Limits. Most people ask me, what is all that blue stuff, or the blue things over there? That's actually I've been kind of experimenting with a couple things, but that is deionized air. So static is my number one issue with old tapes, right? So that's kind of why the back coating is on there, is to reduce the static. Sometimes when the back coating is coming off, you get those static problems again. So every once in a while, if I need to, I can pump in deionized air to which essentially kills all the static on the tape. It's really important, actually. So the 16-track heads, I had these made from John French. These are brand new heads we did for the collection. These are just the super cool extended response flux magnetics heads that John made for me. And they are just, they sound so amazing. We'll get to hear some of the stuff later. And then if you look at the next to the repro head, because we're only using repro heads, we're not doing any recording or mixing or anything like that. So all I need is just the repro head. So you'll see the cell rep head and the erase head was actually John put in these dummy posts for me. So it helps kind of keep the tape on the right path, but it doesn't wear down a head that otherwise I wouldn't need. And so these are super low friction, really helps the tape path. These 16-track heads are phenomenal. So my conversion process, I'm using the merging Horus units. These are pretty incredible units. It's all connected through CAT or AES 67, which is, some people are familiar with, like Dante. It's kind of the same thing. But with the Horus, it can go up to 384 channels. I'm not using that many, obviously, but at 96K, it's more than enough of what I need to do. I'm using the upgraded premium cards with this, so that lets me do everything from 44.1 all the way up to 384 kilohertz, which is obviously twice as much as 192, which everybody's used to. And that's PCM. And then we can also do DSD up to 256. And if you're not familiar with DSD, that's direct stream digital. And that's actually a 1-bit signal, which goes up to, I believe, 11.2 megahertz, which is essentially 4 times greater than SACDs. It's the highest quality that you can possibly imagine. So I'm able to do 24 channels of DSD 256, which is pretty cool. And all that can be done with under 4 samples of latency, which is super important because when you're syncing time code to get it really accurate, the AES 67 really plays a role in how that's all synced up. Of course, this is my Pyramix system where I'm running everything into. So one of the first things I do is I actually check the line level, right? So, but even before I put tape on there, I go through all the channels and make sure in isotope that I'm not seeing any like extra noise. I mean, there's obviously going to be some system noise in there, but I am try to make 100% sure that everything is a clean signal before I even put tape on there. Then I go through the leveling process, setting the alignment tones in the tape, making sure all that's accurate. Sometimes there's on some of these older tapes, they only put tones on one tape or on one track. So it's like, well, how do you set tones or levels on all the tracks when you only have tones on one track? So there's different ways I do that. I mean, I use isotope to kind of check the noise floor. You can kind of get an idea of where the intended levels were. And I compare all this against 2-inch MRLs that I have because I know what the standard is. And what's cool about the Studers is that we can store those MRL information. So I know exactly how off or how close we are with with those tapes. So it's pretty precise. So the next thing I do is the azimuth of the heads. And this is, you'll see in my little illustration here, where it's kind of like the clockwise, counterclockwise movement of the head. This is really important for how things are synced up on the actual recording. And this is kind of one thing that's super important when you're doing tape transfers, because most people don't want to mess with their azimuth or their height or wrap or anything like that. Because they don't want to, if they're doing a tape transfer for somebody, they don't want to mess up their the way their system's calibrated. So they just don't mess with it. But this is absolutely imperative to for every single tape is to adjust the azimuth for that single tape. And you do that, you just stick a tool in the top. That's what those little holes are for up there. And you kind of adjust it, and I can show you how it looks on the screen. But most tape machines, well, every tape machine has an azimuth adjustment. So, you've got, you can see the ones I've kind of marked with tape there. That's the azimuth for some of the other tape machines that I have. And you can actually see if the azimuth is off, what that looks like from the tape. This is way off on looking at it through Pro Tools here. And of course, when you line those up, by adjusting that dial, you get right on. I mean, there's no comb filtering, it's right in sync, and that's pretty important how to do that. So with syncing, this is the most important step, really. We've got most people, what most people try to do is they take the 2-inch tapes and they have like Pro Tools or whatever they're using, and they have that chase the tape, which is actually an incorrect way of doing it, because the tape machine is not necessarily going at the right speed, which essentially causes your Pro Tools or whatever DAW that you're using to change the sample rate in real time. So you may not be getting your full sample rate when you're actually digitizing it. So the actual correct way of doing this is to use these timecode units. And this looks a little, I mean, this is actually simpler than it is. It's essentially, you got, this is feeding timecode to one machine, the timecode's coming out of this machine, and then these two sync up together. And it's telling the tape machine how fast or how slow to go. So it sends the signal back to the tape machine saying, okay, you need to speed up, you need to slow down. And this happens thousands of times a second to make sure you have accurate sync. And then of course, with that, you can record in your multi-track audio. And this was actually a sample of what was the time code on the tape, which is at the top, and the time code that I fed it. And it's just right on. I mean, there's almost no, any delay that's in there is actually from just the latency of the tape playing, essentially. So metadata, oh my gosh. There's so much metadata to cover here. This is actually, I didn't even finish the slide now I look at it, but this is part of our spreadsheet that where we're capturing metadata on. And where we're getting all the information are the original track sheets from a lot of the reels. That could be like the cover of the boxes. A lot of times they used, the shot, some of these shot lists where certain instruments are highlighted. Stage plots, where there's lots of stage plots where David has actually handwritten in, notes of what to expect that's on the recording. And sometimes there's just cool things in there. This was an original program for ACL for Emmylou Harris. And these are just, they don't really, I mean, sometimes they provide some metadata, but they're just kind of fun to read though. And then other times they have handwritten notes on Post-it notes. And this is our track sheet. So you have to kind of go through and figure out what's all on here. And then in other cases, the track sheets are just kind of a mess, and I have to go through here and decipher kind of what some of this stuff is. And it can be a real challenge to come up with what all of these tracks are. So we're capturing a lot of info here. One of the main things is, I try to get all the migration notes, like we talked about before, with the condition of the tape and obviously the descriptions of it. And so all of that stuff from the track sheets, I'm capturing exactly how it was written on the original tracks. And so I use essentially, so we're capturing all this information, but then what I do is I translate that to what's actually on the tape, because sometimes what's written is actually not what's on the tape. And so we're trying to format that to be a little bit more of a standard. So in this case, a SMPTE time code, the original just said SMPTE, where I can be a little bit more descriptive and put in, well, it's 2997 non-drop frame. That, is obviously more descriptive. Gate vocal that's not really descriptive, but it was actually Gatemouth Brown, his vocal track, but he also did in a harmonica, which otherwise we would have never known had it not been captured. Same thing with the fiddle. I mean, we would have never known he played fiddle on there. So when this is all said and done, I could type in, tambourine, and it would essentially pull up every recording ever done for ACL that a tambourine was on. So it's a pretty powerful tool. And so, some of the metadata things you got to think about is, like, some tracks just say piano. Well, that could be an acoustic grand piano or a digital Yamaha DX7, which was popular back then. Sometimes something is labeled keys is not necessarily piano. It's, it could be percussion or an organ or all of the above. I try to be as descriptive as possible with, like, saxophones. Is it a soprano or a tenor or a baritone? Sometimes it's obvious and sometimes it's not. Percussion, I try to be very careful of, because there can be a lot of percussion on stuff. And then of course you have, like, the old standards of, do you do fiddle versus violin or harmonica versus harp? I mean, these are kind of subjective things just to the styles of music. And one of the things I want to show here is the coding history for the Bext information. So we notate every possible, like the routing from where the tape was, what the serial number of the machine is, what kind of tape it was, through the entire process of digitization. So we know we can always trace back, well, this was done on a Studer 827, through Pyramix serial number or whatever. So it's pretty cool to have that information. And all that is embedded in the actual WAV files that we deliver. So, and this is a 1/8 of the spreadsheet of kind of what it looks like. So it's a lot. It's just so much information. So I have an hour or about 30 minutes to listen to a reel, and I am typing nonstop. And so this is, you actually kind of get pretty fast at it, and it's pretty cool. So what do we do with all of it? Well, we do structured XML with it. And so we make these, this is called PB Core, which is a cataloging standard. It's for, audio visual content. And there's different standards. There's PB Core and Dublin Core, EBU Core. There's so many standards behind this. And so this essentially makes all of this data machine readable. So, libraries that have big catalogs and things, you can, go in there and search very easily and say, okay, this is where the tambourines were and all these different tapes. So, and then I stick it all on a hard drive and I ship it in this Pelican case, and that's about the process. So Thank you. I hope that was informative. I've tried to kind of blow through it all as fast as I could.
Matt, 2 questions. How long does it take you to do one tape? And how long is this project going to last? I mean,
So
it seems like you could retire on this project.
Well, no, it's all done in real time. I mean, it's 15 IPS. Usually when we're doing mass digitization, like with 1/4 inch projects, we're doing like several reels at a time, right? I can run like 4, 5, 6 1/4 inch reels at a time. With a 2-inch tape, we're not doing that, particularly with this ACL project, because there's so much metadata involved, and we want to make sure we have the highest quality control standards. So every click, every pop, every, kind of warp thing that's happening, all of that is notated. And if you were to do that with even 2 tape machines, you still wouldn't get to that level of quality that we're getting with just doing a 1-to-1 digitization. So it's pretty important. But yeah, so a 30-minute tape takes 30 minutes. I mean, we run at 15 IPS, so it's all done 1 tape at a time. The project was it's about 2 years long to do the entire collection. I mean, we added kind of an extra 8 months because of the coronavirus stuff. Things kind of slowed down, but we're back at it. So it's all a real-time thing.
So Matt, is there any plan for ACL to turn these into vinyl or commercial-ize them for the public?
Well, yeah, what they do is ultimately they'll end up being remixed and relayed to the original video tracks, so they can use them for their video collection. Very often they on some select old recordings they've baked them and they've transferred them over the years to they have like CDs, like you've seen those like live at Austin CDs that they had. And that was only a handful. I mean, it wasn't very many. So they will have access now to their entire collection where they can choose to, essentially monetize it however they need to. So it's really a powerful tool of how it's all done. So, so that's it, y'all. I know that was long. I'm so sorry. We didn't rehearse this. So we're coming up on an hour and 45 minutes. So I really appreciate y'all sticking in there with us.
Matt, I think we only lost 2 people. So it's pretty amazing. Okay. Yes.
Well, to heck with them anyway.
No one was going anywhere. Well, first of all, thank you. Thank you very much, Matt. You've set a standard here that I don't know how we're going to possibly top it. But what a great first episode of our Zoom program. I guess if anyone has any questions, we got 2 or 3 minutes left here, but thanks a ton, Matt. This really was just fantastic. And what an experience.
It was a lot of fun, y'all. Thank you. If there's any questions, holler at them. Holler at me real quick. Anybody? I can't see the chat box, so.
Yeah, I'm keeping an eye on that. Okay. Nothing yet, so. All right.
Question really early on. Sorry, this is Amanda.
Yeah. Hey, Amanda.
Hey, there was a question really early on, and I don't know if Tom is still here, but it said bake 3 to 14 days for all width tapes or just the 2-inch tapes?
No, that's a great question. So I usually bake like 1/4 inch tape, 16 hours, 12 and 16 hours sometimes. A lot of times I bake it like over the weekend. So maybe it could be a 2 or 3 day bake for smaller tapes. But for those 14-inch reels that I'm doing, those are almost every bit of 2 weeks. And so there's lots of, you have to kind of find where they are per tape and the age of them and the condition and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, the 1/4 inch reels, we can bake quite a few actually in one oven. And it only takes, they say at least 12 to 16 hours is what all the white papers say from AES. But now as tapes get older, they are requiring a little bit more time. So there are some tapes where 3 days is kind of the absolute minimum in some cases. So yeah, there's no real answer to that.
Matt, we do have a couple of questions and comments. One, are there any tapes that you could not transfer or recover?
Actually, there was a couple. And in fact, I got one right here. Oops. So these were old early, like the original Ampex. This was for an artist called Shake Russell. And this was actually on AGFA, which was not the PEM, but it was a different version of AGFA. And it's in an Ampex box. Now, the other two reels for this this artist was actually on the old versions of Ampex. And, you know, I was actually able to transfer it. It has so many issues. It just, you know, it's not so much with binder hydrolysis, with sticky shed, as much as it is loss of lubrication, which is otherwise known as soft binder syndrome. And so, you know, the way the polyesters, they actually have these kind of natural lubricants that are actually built into the tape. So it kind of helps the tape kind of glide over the tape path. With these, with the soft binder, they've essentially kind of broken down. So, you know, in a worst case scenario, I would use like a D5 siloxane, or you can actually do it at a low temperature, like actually playing back cold. In some cases, if you just add like distilled water a little bit to the heads, that's all it needs, and it doesn't ruin the tape or the heads. So there's lots of different things that you can do to make it work. But yeah, that was a tough one because of tension issues, and of course, I think I cleaned the heads in between every single song on that tape, so it took a long time. Yeah.
All right. Well, I think it's probably time to wrap this one up. Thanks again, Matt, and thanks to everyone for joining. Send us your ideas for future programs, and hope you join AES Atlanta if you're not a member.